Grace and peace be unto you from God our Father. The loneliness of the cross. Reproach hath broken my heart, and I am full of heaviness. And I looked for some to take pity, but there was none, and for comforters, but I found none. Psalm 69, verse 20. Handel's Messiah opens with a promise of comfort. But for the one God had appointed to bring the comfort, there was no comfort at all. In a story that David Winter conveyed once, he said, I remember a speaker in a youth meeting some 40 years ago saying that Jesus died a real death for real sins. I also remember the impact it had on me. Though the words seemed obvious, I can still recall the shock. I think until then I'd rather the crucifixion as kind of a play acted out between Jesus, his Father, and the powers of evil, with the result predetermined. After all, it ended in resurrection. The thought that Jesus died a real death, the sort of death that human convicts might suffer at the hands of an executioner, or that ordinary people might experience in the hospital or in their sick room was almost shocking. This was the Son of God. How could the one through whom the Word was created end up like one of his mortal creatures? But the message of these words, taken from Psalm 69, is of loneliness, of human suffering, a loneliness that Jesus experienced on the cross. The psalmist, possibly writing at a time when Jerusalem had been destroyed by the armies of Nebuchadnezzar at the beginning of the 6th century, utters a cry of desperation as much as faith. Although it echoes with the agony of despair, rescue me from sinking in the mire. Let me be delivered from my enemies and from the deep waters. Do not let the flood sweep over me, or the deep swallow me up, or the pit close its mouth over me. Those words from the psalmist, again, come from Psalm 69. And worst of all, he was to face it alone. Jesus faced this suffering alone. I have become a stranger to my kindred and an alien to my mother's children. Jesus cried to God in desperation because all human help had abandoned him. We may ask how relevant these words are to Jesus on the cross. Certainly Handel chooses to emphasize the abandonment of Jesus rather than his calm and trusting acceptance of the Father's will. It follows Mark's gospel, in other words, rather than Luke's, but that is only to choose between two absolutely true and two relevant insights. Jesus did trust his Father implicitly, and even in the darkest hour of suffering, he never doubted his purpose. Yet he also experienced a degree of isolation from the Father, which opened up the Godhead to something completely new, the pain of mortality. The translation used here from the Book of Common Prayer implies that it was the Lord's rebuke that had broken his heart. But God was not rebuking his Son. The rebuke, as all other translations make clear, was human. The scorn and reproaches of the crowd, the vicious words of his enemies. And there was no one to comfort him. This is a stark and bitter truth. Jesus' mother stood by the cross. It is true to be joined at some point by his disciples and his beloved one, John. But the faithful women, they stood there. They stood at a distance. The scene was filled with hatred and alienation. The indifferent soldiers doing their job, the mocking priests and scornful crowd. In the center of the circle of hatred hung the King of love. History can offer no paradox to equal that. Isaiah had promised centuries before that comfort would come with the arrival of the Messiah. Now he had come, and he was winning comfort for the world on the cross. But for the one who was dying there was no comfort at all, except that he was doing the will of the Father. When we are called upon to experience abuse and especially to bear it alone, we can reflect that the Son of God has been there before us. Like the psalmist, we may feel let down, even abandoned by God. But the psalm ends not with despair, but with faith. The Lord hears the needy, and he does not despise his captive people. Let heaven and earth praise him.
Some to have peace.